San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hello, I'm Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Brian Clark, a Basiliadis Director of USD's Humanities Center.
USD, including the College of Arts and Sciences and the Humanities Center, is proud to be the presenting sponsor for the 2023 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. This is the festival's second year on campus and the fourth year of our partnership with the Union-Tribune.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables us avid readers to come together as a community alongside renowned authors from all over the world and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and meaningful themes.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across disciplines, and equips students to solve complex problems in a variety of ways.
So on behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the festival.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Peña, and I'm thrilled to be here with the San Diego Festival of Books virtual experience. I'm a New York Times bestselling author of several young adult novels, including Mexican White Boy and Ball Don't Lie. My latest book is called Patchwork, and it's a picture book, and it explores a child's endless possibilities. As a writer, I'm passionate about exploring themes of identity, social justice, and the human experience. I believe literature has the power to create empathy and understanding, so I'm honored to be talking with the talented and best-selling author, Angie Thomas, as we discuss her latest novel, Nic Blake and the Remarkables. Hello, Angie.
Hi.
Angie is known for her groundbreaking work in young adult literature, including her debut novel, The Hate You Give, which was adapted into a major motion picture. Her latest book, Nic Blake and the Remarkables, is a departure from the YA genre, but still carries her signature style of tackling important social issues. In our conversation, we will explore the inspiration behind the book, Angie's writing process, and her thoughts on the importance of representation in literature. Now, let's meet Angie Thomas. Hello.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm so excited to talk about your new book. I just finished it last night, and this morning, while my daughter was eating oatmeal, she tried to steal it, but I hung on to it, so I still have it. And I actually wanted to start with something that I mentioned in the intro, which is you have, all these award-winning, best-selling young adult novels. It's tempting to kind of stay in that space, knowing that readers are eager to see the next Angie Thomas YA novel. So what prompted the move to middle grade?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for being here, Matt. Thank you all for being here, viewers. And thank you to the San Diego Festival of Books for having me. I've always wanted to write middle grade. It was something I wanted to do even before I wrote The Hate You Give, because middle grade books are really the books that stuck with me. I remember when I was in college, I studied creative writing, and I was trying to figure out what type of creative writing I wanted to do. I explored screenwriting, I explored journalism, poetry, all of these types of writing, but books felt like, novels felt like the space for me. And I was talking to a professor about it, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, but what kind of books do I want to write? And he asked me, okay, when you think about the books that have had the greatest impact on you, what category, what genre? And immediately I started thinking about how I fell in love with the books about the boy wizard. I fell in love with the books about the kids going through the wardrobe into Narnia. I fell in love with A Wrinkle in Time. I fell in love with all these middle grade fantasy books. And so he said, well, maybe you have your answer. Maybe that's what you should do. And I tried writing something right out of college. and it was rejected like 300 times. And I now look back on that and I'm thankful that it was, because it wasn't the right story, it wasn't the right time, but also I wasn't writing what I really wanted to write. The character in that book was a young white boy, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's what I thought could get published at that time, because we didn't see nearly as much diversity in kids lit as we do now, and we definitely didn't see books about Black girls going on magical adventures. But I didn't have the courage to try to do it, and I didn't think that it was something that would even get published. So I ended up writing in that book, though, a 12-year-old girl who I loved as a side character, and her name was Nic Blake. And I loved that character, and I was like, in a perfect world, I'd write the book about her. And once that book was rejected 300 times, the original book, I ended up putting it aside and I wrote The Hate U Give. And the funny thing about The Hate U Give is the timing of it, and in publishing, when there was a call for diverse kids lit, when there were people calling publishing to task saying, hey, we need more diverse books. Shout out to We Need Diverse Books. Shout out to Walter Dean Myers and the work he did just by writing an article calling out the lack of diversity. Though them laying the foundation led to The Hate U Give being able to not only get published, but to be the success that it is. And seeing the way people love that book made me go, maybe I can really write the stories I want to tell. And so over the years, I've had so many young people who've said, like 10-year-olds who like, I want to read your books, but my mom says I'm not ready yet. And I've thought to myself, you know what? If your mom says you're not ready, you're not ready. So maybe I need to consider writing something for you that you can handle right now. And that's essentially what brought me back to decide to write the middle grade I've always wanted to write.
That's so interesting. And I also, I want to echo your shout out of We Need Diverse Books and Eleanor, and so much good has come out of that movement. But yeah, so you had this is interesting. You had this book that was getting rejected, but I totally believe that there is no book that's a failure because you lifted something from it. And it sounds like, so Nic Blake came sort of from that experience. Now, you did, though, move into young adult, and you were operating in that territory for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Now, coming back to a middle grade story again, can you talk about a little bit the difference between writing YA and middle grade? I mean, I've written YA novels and picture books, but that's very different from middle grade. It's more than just the amount of curse words, I'm assuming. So what else would you say goes into like shifting the voice to middle grade?
Absolutely. And I so admire the fact that you've done both young adult and picture books. I want to write picture books one day. I've already been putting together ideas about a picture book about my dog Kobe. So just putting that out there, y'all. But the adjustment, first off, it took me, also reminding myself, no curse words, but I had to look at the world through a different lens, essentially. When I'm writing my books about young adults, teenagers, 16, 17-year-olds, they have a better idea of how the world operates. I think with Nic and with kids, Nic's age, Nic is 12 in the book, that's around the age you start realizing that, there are a lot of problems in the world. How does my world really look? That's when you start to see your world at times for what it really is. I think that's around the age range when the rose-colored glasses start disappearing and you start to see things for what they are. And even though you don't necessarily understand it, it makes you question not only what you thought you knew, but who you think you are. Whereas in young adult novels, you come into the world kind of in these books, in these characters' books, you come into their world and they kind of already know the world is messed up. But what they're now trying to figure out is their place in it. Whereas with Nic isn't necessarily trying to just figure out her place in the world. She's trying to figure the world out, period. She's trying to figure out, okay, is everything what I thought it was? And so it was just about taking that approach with the character and writing her and figuring her voice out. But also for me, writing Nic was almost like a love letter to Star and Bree, the two characters from my first two novels, The Hate U Give and On the Come Up. If you're familiar with those books, you know that those girls experience a lot of trauma in their lives, even before we meet them in the books. They've gone through things as kids. and it's affected them, and it's affected how they view the world, whereas Nic does not have that trauma. And so I feel like, to a degree, Nic is what Star and Bree would have been like if they wouldn't have experienced that trauma. So in a way, for me, it was almost a love letter to those girls to say, hey, or those girls who see themselves in Nic and Bree to say, hey, I'm going to give you something for that inner child that has been traumatized. I'm going to hopefully give you a balm for that. And it was a balm for me in a lot of ways. So, but the shift, it helped me. The shift actually helped me, because in Nic rediscovering the world, I started to rediscover the world, and I saw a little bit more hope than I initially did.
Thing. Getting into the book, and I don't want to give anything away, but there were a couple elements that I was really taken by. I love the father. I love the father-daughter relationship. I'm a father, so of course I'm falling for that. That was one of my favorite parts of the story, is especially when she got to this point where she thought maybe, she was hearing that something was wrong there. He did something wrong, but she believed in him. And I really loved that element. But I also want to ask you about your inclusion of African folklore, African American folklore, and also Jackson, Mississippi. So can you talk a little bit about, including those realistic elements into fantasy?
Oh yeah, that was fun, and for me, it was important. I tell people all the time, this book is still an Angie Thomas book. This book is still an Angie Thomas book. Let's get that straight.
Well, it's the voice. I think it's the voice.
Exactly.
The voice pops.
Thank you. And also, it was important for me to include real life history, real things, but also to show that Black people in America, we have our own folklore, we have mythology, and so much of it has been forgotten. I love Michael B. Jordan, but it was like a few years ago, he once said, African Americans, we don't have that folklore, we don't have that mythology, and that's a lie. No offense, Michael, I love you, but that's a lie. We do. We have stories like The People Could Fly. Virginia Hamilton did a fantastic job of making sure that story remained in our conscious by putting it in an anthology years ago called The People Could Fly. We have the story of John Henry. We have High John the Conqueror. We have Annie Christmas. All these bigger than life folk tales that were passed down from generation to generation. So I want to pay homage to that. But I also, since it's an Angie Thomas book, I want to talk about real world things, history and present, and address them in a way that's age appropriate, but it's still not making it necessarily an issue book by bringing those elements in, but making it a book that still addresses or mentions these issues. There's a huge difference. But also, it was important to incorporate my city of Jackson, my hometown of Jackson, because I've had a lot of kids from Jackson ask me, when are you going to set a book here? I've had teachers, when are you going to set a book here? Because my other books, they don't mention a city or state, even though Jackson heavily influenced them. And then also recognizing that a lot of times when you see Jackson in books and films and TV shows, they're often set in the past during the civil rights movement. And that's great, so we can know our history, but there's so many things about Jackson now that people don't know. So I thought it would be cool to bring my hometown in and even give it a little magical twist that the kids here probably would really take a liking to.
You got the pressure from the community. Hey, where's Jackson?
Listen,
by the way,
there's nothing like having a kid ask you, why don't you put this in there?
It's true.
Because then you're like, oh, why don't I?
I know. Also, is it true this whole like dormant volcano under Jackson? Is that a true thing?
Yes, it is absolutely true.
That is wild.
It is 1000% true. Jackson is built on top of a dormant volcano. And the funny thing about it, they say that the opening of the volcano is downtown under the fairgrounds. And like, that means that the Coliseum, which is like has like literally a big top, is on top of the opening of the volcano.
Wow.
But like, if you go downtown in Jackson, you'll notice like there's this street called High Street, and it goes up high, and you're like basically going up the volcano. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
That's so cool. Writing a book like this, there are a lot of twists and turns in this book and some pretty unexpected twists at the end, which we won't obviously get into. But
Yeah.
like when you sit down to write a book like this, and I'm assuming this is part of a series, right? There's another book coming, maybe two
Yes,
more,
at least.
at least two. So
Mhm.
what do you do? This is outside of my comfort zone as a writer. But did you conceive of the entire series arc before you broke ground on book one, or is it something where you're kind of following the characters and new plot stuff is emerging as you go? Like, talk about that process.
It's a little bit of both. I always look at my outlines, whether it's for a single book or for a series in this case. I look at them as a GPS, but it's me using a GPS in a city I'm familiar with. And so if you ever use GPS somewhere you're familiar with, there are times where you're, letting the GPS tell you make this turn, make that turn. But then every now and then you're like, I don't have to go on the interstate for that. I don't have to go on the highway for that. I can go this way. And so you go off the path that the GPS gives you. And suddenly the GPS is like, make a U-turn, make a U-turn. And then eventually it catches up with where you're going and it readjusts. That's how I look at my outlines. I know where I'm going. I know where I want to go. But every now and then I get away from the directions that the GPS gives, my outline gives. And I may make a turn here or a turn there because I know, oh, this will benefit the story a little bit more. Oh, this will give me a little more of this, and this. Or I like going this way a little bit more. But I will eventually get back on track with the outline, the GPS. That's the best way I can describe it. So I'm not married to my outline. Well, we're in a good relationship.
But there's also, when you write a fantasy book, though, there has to be world building in a way that in a realistic fiction book, there's also world building, but we rely on sort of shared knowledge more.
Yeah.
You can kind of shorthand some stuff, but I feel like, and there are amazing fantasy books out there and the best ones. And I think you're doing this in your book, is the exposition is almost snuck in. You know what I mean? It's not like, hey, let's stop the story and build the world. It's just sort of organic.
Thank
So
you.
I appreciated that part of the story. I have a theory.
Okay.
So we talked about, you said this is an Angie Thomas book. Well, I saw a parallel here that might be a stretch, and you tell me if I'm off here. I feel like Star had to navigate in The Hate You Give this sort of like working class community, but then going to the elite private school, right? And had to code switch. I feel like there's a version of code switching that takes place in this middle grade novel. Like, I feel like Nic is living in the unremarkable area, but she's remarkable. And I feel like in the house, she can talk about things she can't outside. Does that ring true for you, that there's a little bit of code switching involved here?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Nic and Star are similar in that they, they're living in two different worlds, two very different worlds. And in one world, you have to be careful of what you say. You can't talk about, the magical stuff in the non-magical world, the remarkable stuff in the unremarkable world. You can't talk about that. So in a lot of ways, she has to, tamper that down. She has to act like that side of her doesn't exist in order to navigate our world and survive in our world, So yeah, you got it.
Okay, I feel validated. I might, do a little essay about this. Okay, something you kind of touched on a little bit, but I wanted to get back into it. So, fantasy traditionally, you wouldn't see Nic as the hero, right? But I still think, even with all the work that's been done, right, with We Need Diverse Books and just calling everything to task, I still think, we are living in a time where a lot of books are banned. You have a lot of experience with that. Hundreds of books are being challenged, at least. So how, as parents, can we sort of support challenged books, but also how can we get out of the mindset of walking into the bookstore looking for a middle grade novel for our son or daughter and thinking we need to match the book up with the child in terms of their experiences being so similar? Like, some parents might think this book isn't for their third or fifth, sixth grader, because the girl on the cover looks different than their daughter. Can you what are your thoughts there?
Well, I say one, kids always find ways to identify with the main character, whether they look like them or not, whether their experiences are exactly the same or not. Kids still find ways to identify with the character because kids have not lost their empathy. Kids still have empathy. They have way more empathy than adults. And because they carry that empathy, they have no problem putting themselves in the shoes of someone unlike them and still finding some common ground. So we have to give kids more credit. And then I would say too, that, as we're dealing with book bans and challenges, there's a lot of loud wrongness right now. And I need parents who support these books to be just as loud. I need them to organize just as much as the other parents do. I need them, if these books are benefiting your children, say something about it, do something about it. The whole, at the core of this, certain people want to say at the core of this is an issue about parents' rights. So since it is an issue about parents' rights, if you agree with these books, if you want these books in the libraries, you have a right as a parent to make yourself heard about that. You have a right to fight for these books. So I would encourage parents to get involved in school boards, just like the other side is doing. I would say, go to the school board meetings, write letters of support for these books, make yourselves heard. It's not so simple as just saying, oh, well, you know what? I'll make sure the books are in my house, forget the school. But don't just think about your kid. There are other kids at that school who may not, their family may not be in a position to speak up, speak out, or whatever it may be. This kid could need a book. They could need this book, and they may need you to speak up for them as well. So, I also need parents to recognize that if it's starting with the books, who knows what's next? So books are just the beginning of it.
Well, and you make such a good point that, one parent can come in, challenge a book, and it can be pulled. So their voice is sort of affecting the rest of, parents' kids in that school district or class. And I think that's a good point. Parents on the positive side can be just as loud and maybe make as much change. Okay. Getting, kind of continuing with the book banning, with The Hate U Give specifically, obviously one of the top 10 banned books pretty much every year, right? Is there anything you've learned about this? And here's what I'm curious about. Does it ever kind of place itself in the back of your mind that, your books are challenged often as you're writing a news story? Do you think about that? And then a related question, I believe writing for young people can be a form of activism, but how do you balance activism with entertainment? What occurs to you there?
I often think of a quote by Toni Morrison, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but she said, at its core, the purpose of racism is to distract. And what I have to remind myself as a creative is, what is my job? What do I want to do? What is my calling? I feel like I am called to write books for kids, and I'm called to write books that young Black kids especially see themselves in. And in doing that, I'm going to be doing my activism. I'm going to be doing my work. And I can't worry so much about what goes on beyond that. I can only do my half of the job. It's up to everybody else to do the rest, But of course, it was in the back of my mind, especially when I was writing my second novel, On the Come Up. It was in the back of my mind the entire time. It made it difficult to write that book. But by the time I got to my third one, Concrete Rose, I said, you know what? Forget it. If they're going to ban it, they're going to ban it. They're going to find a reason to ban it. But what's interesting to me, and that's something I've noticed and something that frustrates me, is that a lot of times the books are banned without people actually reading the entire book. They will judge it by the cover, like literally sometimes, or they will judge it by one little excerpt, or they will just make an entire assumption about that book, just off of one little paragraph that's posted online. Now, here's what's interesting to me about that. The parallel there is that the same way they're making quick judgments about my books, that's the same way they make quick judgments about the real stars out there, the real Khalils, the real Breeze, the real Mavericks, these Black kids who may come from certain neighborhoods, who may speak a certain way, act a certain way. people make quick judgments about them. So the same thing you're doing to the books about those kids, you're doing to those kids. And that's where I take offense. That's where
Yeah.
my anger lies.
Yeah,
So
that's such a great point.
the only thing I can do is try to continue to humanize those kids. That's
Yeah.
it. That's all I
Yeah.
know to do.
And I've kind of been obsessed with Southern literature for a long time, and now you're a part of the legacy of writing coming out of the South. What's going on in these Southern states? Why is there such good literature coming out of there? Do you have any like idea about that?
Because there's nothing else to do in some of these
No,
states.
really? Is it
Like
because
right now.
it can be slow sometimes? I know. Like one of my favorite things is, if you travel a lot, you go to different parts of the country, and I feel like you get a certain amount of time to tell your story. So like if you're in the checkout stand at the grocery store in New York, you have about 1 second to say what you got to say, your joke or whatever. I feel like sometimes when I've been in the South, and specifically in Mississippi, I remember one time being in a grocery store, and at the checkout stand, a guy got a good 3 minutes to tell what just happened to him on the weekend previous. And maybe there's something there, but
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's amazing stories coming out of the South.
Absolutely. Here, people are quicker to open themselves up to a stranger. And so you have no choice but to pick up on stories and to let your imagination run wild too. And I know for me, anytime I'm in Mississippi, that's when I feel like my imagination really opens up, because Mississippi is a place that has such a rich but unfortunate history that at times I can't help but imagine what it should be like. And as a writer, that's what fuels me.
Huh, interesting. What do you have coming next? I'm assuming there's going to be another Nic book, but tell us like what's on the hopper for you.
Yeah, so yes, I have the sequel to Nic Blake and the Remarkables. I'm working on it now. We have a title. I'm super excited about it.
By the way, these readers of fantasy series, they're going to put some pressure on you. They want these things quick,
Oh yeah, no, it's coming. It's coming. It'll be out next year, no problem. So I'm working on the sequel. Super excited about that. I will say that the adaptation process is on hold because as a proud member of the Screenwriters Guild, I'm on strike as far as screenwriting goes. And for those of you who know, please support Screenwriters Guild, Writers Guild, as we fight for fair pay from these studios in Hollywood. So until they do that, there won't be any adaptations. Yeah. So hopefully that'll help the public put a little more pressure on them. So there's that. And then I can't say exactly what, but I will give a few hints. But there will be a graphic novel coming soon, not for Nic Blake, but for another book of mine that people really loved. And very cool. I'm super excited about that because graphic novels are novels. And I'm super excited for young people who may not, like reading to now have another way into that book that will hopefully be beneficial. So I'm looking forward to being able to talk about that.
I think what we're learning with first of all, there's so many amazing graphic novels coming out, but I think we're learning that visual reading is just as valuable as reading text, right? Like I think you can pull so much out of that. Okay, as a writer, what are you reading? And I'm curious about this. Do you read certain kinds of books or not, fiction, nonfiction while you're working on a project? Or, I know some people try to avoid certain authors because it's so tempting to emulate their voice, that kind of thing. Yeah. What do you read when you're in the process of writing a book, or what do you read when you're kind of between projects?
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I never read like the same genre as I'm writing in the same category. So right now I've been reading like a lot of nonfiction. I reread The People Could Fly, the anthology by Virginia Hamilton. I read American Folktales by, I've forgotten the author's name, I'm sorry. But I've been reading that. I even read, but I did read fiction. I reread Kindred by Octavia Butler. So I've been, kind of getting my feet deeper into, folklore, that sort of thing.
Sounds like a lot of research, right?
Oh, you're doing some research? I even read Spare by Prince Harry, just because it's interesting to see, you know, what life was like for a royal. You know, I don't want to spoil Nic Blake, but you'll kind of get why I'm reading that if you read the book. So
That's kind of interesting. That's intriguing. Wow, you read Spare.
yeah, I did.
Good for you. I'm impressed. But is there more research required for this series than your previous work?
I'd say it's kind of similar especially with The Hate You Give. I had to do a lot of research on the legal stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
grand
point.
juries and police reporting, all of that. I had to do a lot of research on that when writing that novel. But with this one, you know, I'm doing research on folklore and stuff like that. But the fun thing about a fantasy book is you can make some stuff up as you go. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why I also like the realistic parts of it too, though, because it has that like balance of grounding us, you know, in Jackson, for instance, which the novel is partially set in, but then taking us to a magical world. That's pretty fun.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So you have huge fans in San Diego. I'm one of them. I'm so proud to be living here now and being able to, like, you know, share your work with my family, but also kids around the community. So thank you so much for all you do. And it's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And now I'm going to read this closing. It has been a pleasure to talk with Angie Thomas, and I hope you also enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Angie, for sharing your passion for storytelling with us, and we look forward to reading more of your stories. You can order Nic Blake and the Remarkables and Patchwork through the festival's online bookstore, which you may see on your screen below, bookshop.org. The link is at the bottom of the screen. Every book sale supports our indie bookseller partners who enrich our literary community. Please donate to the San Diego Council on Literacy so everyone has access to the resources needed to read. You can donate on the website, sdfestivalofbooks.com, and click the tab Donate. Continue watching the festival's on-demand videos and live-streamed author panels. All videos are available on sdfestivalofbooks.com. Thank you for tuning in, and please share this video.
A liberal arts education is at the core of the University of San Diego. The liberal arts,
Really cool.
spanning from the humanities and arts to natural and social sciences, enable students to navigate their way in the world and to have the tools to solve complex problems in a variety of ways. There's a lot of evidence that shows a strong liberal arts education prepares you not for your first or your second job, but for your life.
We use our phones to order food, share our stories, and so much more. SDCCU made banking from your mobile device easy too. You can do so much. Get up-to-date account balances, deposit checks, and more, safely and securely, all through the convenience of your smartphone. Get all of this and more with free checking with e-statements. SDCCU, it's not big bank banking, it's better.